Sir, we have a gentleman here that needs help, and he's not breathing yet. He's not breathing, and we're trying to pump him, but he's not.
Okay. Okay, how old is he?
He's 50 years old, sir.
50, okay. He's unconscious, he's not breathing?
Yes, he's not.
In the summer of 2009, Michael Jackson was supposed to return to the stage. Not for one concert, not for one television appearance, but for the comeback that was meant to remind the world why he was called the King of Pop. The announcement was enormous. 50 shows in London. A production bigger than anything he had attempted before. A final chance for millions of fans to see Michael Jackson perform live. The concerts were called This Is It. And for the public. Those 3 words sounded like a promise. But behind the rehearsals, behind the cameras, and behind the excitement of a global comeback, Michael was living through a far more difficult reality. He was exhausted. He struggled to sleep. The pressure surrounding the shows was enormous. And the man the world expected to be unstoppable was carrying a weight that few people around him fully understood. Just days before his death, Michael was still rehearsing, still dancing, still working through songs that had defined generations. To fans who saw the rehearsal footage later, he looked focused, creative, determined. But the final chapter of Michael Jackson's life was not simply about a concert series that never happened. It was about a man who had spent his entire life performing for the world, and who, at 50 years old, was preparing to do it all again. Today, we are looking at the heartbreaking truth behind Michael Jackson's final comeback. The dream, the pressure, the sleepless nights, the final rehearsals, and the official facts surrounding the day the world lost one of the greatest entertainers in history. Michael Jackson had been famous for almost as long as he could remember. Before he was a teenager, he was already performing with the Jackson 5. Before most people experience ordinary adulthood, Michael had already become a global phenomenon. Then came Off the Wall, then Thriller, then Bad, then Dangerous, then History. Every era brought a new version of Michael, a new sound, a new dance move, a new moment that changed pop culture forever. But fame also came with a cost. 4 decades. Every appearance was examined. Every decision was debated. Every change in his life became a headline. By the mid-2000s, Michael had spent years away from the stage. Fans wondered if he would ever return. Then, in March 2009, he walked onto a stage at London's O2 Arena and made an announcement that sent shockwaves around the world. He was coming back. This Is It was initially planned as a limited run of concerts. But demand was overwhelming. Tickets sold at a historic pace. The schedule grew to 50 shows. For fans, it was a dream. For Michael, it was a massive commitment. The shows were expected to begin in July. That meant weeks of preparation, long rehearsals, complex choreography, costume fittings, musical arrangements, stage effects, and the pressure of knowing that every performance would be watched by people who remembered him at his absolute peak. Michael was not simply preparing for concerts. He was preparing to face his own legend. The production team wanted something spectacular. Michael wanted something meaningful. He was involved in the creative process. He discussed visual ideas, music, dance, film sequences, and messages about the environment and the future. Even during rehearsals, the imagination that had made him famous was still there. People who worked with him remembered moments of remarkable focus. When the music began, the performer inside him appeared. He knew the rhythms. He knew the movements. He knew how to command a room without saying much at all. But outside those moments, there were concerns. The rehearsal schedule was demanding. The expectations were enormous. And Michael had been dealing with chronic insomnia. Sleep had become one of the most difficult parts of his life. Night after night, he struggled to rest. And when someone cannot sleep, everything else becomes harder. Energy disappears. Anxiety grows. The body begins to feel like it is working against you. For a performer preparing for 50 major shows, that kind of exhaustion could become frightening. Michael's personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, was brought into his life during this period. According to later investigation records and court evidence, Murray had been treating Michael's insomnia with sedatives and, eventually, propofol anesthetic normally used in carefully monitored medical settings. At the time, the public knew almost none of this. They only saw the comeback, the rehearsals, the headlines, the excitement. And then came June 24, 2009. Michael arrived at the Staples Center in Los Angeles for what would become his final full rehearsal. The footage from that night would later be seen around the world. He performed songs including They Don't Care About Us, Human Nature, and Billie Jean. He worked through Smooth Criminal. He rehearsed Man in the Mirror. For the people in the room, it was not supposed to be goodbye. It was supposed to be preparation. A few more weeks, and Michael Jackson would be back in front of thousands of fans. But after the rehearsal ended, Michael went home. And what happened during the hours that followed would change music history forever. Because the final comeback of the King of Pop was about to become one of the most heartbreaking stories Hollywood had ever known. On the night of June 24, 2009, Michael Jackson left the Staples Center after what would become his final full rehearsal. For everyone around him, the show was still moving forward. There were costumes to finish, dance routines to perfect, special effects to prepare, and only a short time remained before the first London performance. But Michael was exhausted. The pressure of the comeback had been building for months. 50 concerts, thousands of tickets sold, millions of fans waiting, and a production so massive that every rehearsal carried the weight of an entire global event. Yet the biggest problem was not the dancing. It was not the music. It was sleep. 4 years, Michael had struggled with insomnia. But during the final weeks before the problem had become increasingly serious. He reportedly feared another sleepless night. And after long days of rehearsals, he needed rest more than ever. Because without sleep, there was no way to perform at the level the world expected. That night, Michael returned to his rented home in Los Angeles. His personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, was there. According to court testimony and the official investigation, Murray had been treating Michael with different sedatives in an attempt to help him sleep. But Michael was still unable to rest. As the night moved into the early hours of June 25th, the situation became more serious. Michael reportedly continued asking for what he called milk. It was a nickname used for propofol, a powerful anesthetic normally administered in hospitals or surgical settings. Propofol was not an ordinary sleep medication. It was designed to be used with careful monitoring, specialized equipment, and trained medical staff nearby. But in Michael's bedroom, there was no hospital team, no full medical monitoring system, no emergency equipment prepared for a crisis, only a doctor, a patient desperate for sleep, and a decision that would have devastating consequences. According to evidence presented in court, Murray eventually administered propofol. At some point during the morning, Michael stopped breathing. The exact final moments were examined closely during the investigation. Murray later said he found Michael unresponsive and tried to revive him. Emergency services were called. Paramedics arrived at the home. They worked desperately to save him. Then Michael was rushed to UCLA Medical Center. Doctors continued resuscitation efforts. But despite every attempt, Michael Jackson was pronounced dead on June 25, 2009. He was 50 years old. The news spread with unbelievable speed. Within minutes, crowds gathered outside the hospital. Radio stations interrupted programming. Television networks went live. Websites crashed under the weight of millions of people searching for answers. Across the world, fans struggled to accept what they were hearing. The King of Pop was gone. For people who had grown up with his music, it felt impossible. Michael Jackson had always seemed larger than life. He had broken records, changed music videos forever, created dance moves copied by generations, performed in stadiums filled with screaming fans. How could someone so iconic, so creative, so unforgettable, be gone so suddenly? But as grief turned into shock, questions began to grow. What had happened inside that house? Why was Michael receiving such powerful medication? Who was responsible? The autopsy and official investigation later confirmed that Michael's death was caused by acute propofol intoxication, with other sedatives also contributing. The Los Angeles County coroner ruled the death a homicide in the medical legal sense. That ruling did not mean a conspiracy. It meant that Michael's death resulted from the actions of another person. The focus of the investigation quickly turned to Dr. Conrad Murray. Court proceedings revealed troubling details about the treatment Michael had received. Prosecutors argued that Murray had provided propofol outside an appropriate medical setting, failed to properly monitor Michael, and delayed calling emergency services after discovering him unresponsive. In 2011, a jury found Dr. Conrad Murray guilty of involuntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison. For Michael's family, for his children, and for millions of fans. The verdict answered some questions, but it could never undo the loss. Because beneath every headline, there was still a painful truth. Michael Jackson had not been preparing for an ending. He had been preparing for a beginning. He wanted to return to the stage. He wanted to give fans one more unforgettable chapter. Instead, his final rehearsal became a goodbye no one saw coming. And in the days that followed, the world would discover just how much of Michael's final comeback had already been captured on camera. Footage that would reveal not only his extraordinary talent, but also the heartbreaking dream he never got the chance to complete. In the days after Michael Jackson's death, the world struggled to process what had happened. Outside his home, outside Akla Medical Center, not surrounded by the usual glamour, not hidden behind elaborate costumes, just Michael, working, creating, trying to make every moment perfect. The film revealed something audiences had not seen in years. His attention to detail was still extraordinary. He knew every beat, every transition, every camera angle, every moment when the music needed to rise. Even after decades of fame, Michael was still a student of his own art. He wasn't simply showing up to perform old hits. He was trying to create something new, something meaningful, something his fans would remember forever. One of the most emotional moments in the film came during rehearsals for Man in the Mirror. As Michael sang the words about change, responsibility, and looking within yourself, the message felt different, more personal, more painful, because the audience watching the film already knew what Michael did not, that these were among his final performances. The movie became a massive success. Fans around the world filled theaters. Many cried. Many applauded. Some came back more than once. They weren't just watching a concert film. They were saying goodbye. But beyond the music, Michael's death left behind a family facing unimaginable grief. His children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket, were suddenly forced to grow up without their father. 4 years. Michael had worked hard to protect them from the public spotlight. Now, they were standing in front of the world during one of the most painful moments of their lives. At Michael's memorial service, his daughter Paris spoke through tears. She told the world that her father had been the best dad anyone could ever imagine. It was one of the most heartbreaking moments of that day. Because behind the superstar, behind the headlines, behind the controversies, there was also a father whose children loved him deeply. As the years passed, Michael's children slowly began building lives of their own. And while they have faced enormous public attention, they have often spoken about the love and protection Michael gave them. For them, he was not the king of pop. He was Dad. That is a side of Michael's story the world sometimes forgets. The global superstar was also a human being. A son, a brother, a father, a man who had lived under public attention since childhood, and a performer who carried the weight of impossible expectations for nearly his entire life. Today, more than 15 years after his death, Michael Jackson's influence remains everywhere. New artists still study his dance moves. Musicians still study his production. Performers still study his stage presence. And fans still discover his music for the first time. Thriller remains one of the most important albums in history. Billie Jean still fills dance floors. Beat It still brings crowds to life. Man in the Mirror still moves people. And the moonwalk still feels like magic. That is the power of a true artist. Time passes. Generations change. But the work survives. The heartbreaking truth behind Michael Jackson's final comeback is that he never got the chance to stand in front of those London crowds again. He never heard the applause waiting for him. He never completed the final chapter he had worked so hard to create. But perhaps, in another way, he did return. through the rehearsal footage, through the film, through the music that continues playing in homes, cars, stadiums, and concert halls around the world. Michael Jackson's final comeback did not happen the way anyone expected. It became a goodbye, but it also became a reminder of the imagination, the discipline, the vulnerability, and the extraordinary talent of a man who changed music forever. Some performers become famous. Some become legends. Michael Jackson became something even bigger, a memory shared by the entire world. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments. What is your favorite Michael Jackson song or performance? Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.